Folks, I've been ranching these parts for nigh on 40 years, and what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your very core. At 6:47 this morning, I got the kind of call that makes a man's blood run cold. My prize Arabian camel, Layla, 7 months pregnant with what could be the finest calf this county's ever seen, was trapped in the coils of a 20-foot python that had no business being in East Texas. But here's the thing that'll stay with me till my dying day. Her mate, Badr, all 2,000 bonds of him, was standing guard over her like some kind of four-legged angel of mercy. That camel had been fighting that snake for 2 solid hours, blood streaming down his shoulders, exhaustion written in every labored breath. Yet he wouldn't budge, not 1 inch. The veterinary team was 4 hours out. Nearest animal hospital was 2 hours away. And Badr, well, that magnificent beast wouldn't let a soul get close enough to help. Sometimes the good Lord tests us in ways we never saw coming. And what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what it means to protect family. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning mist hung over Lazy Creek Ranch like a shroud, and through it I could see Badr standing sentinel over Layla, his massive frame trembling with exhaustion, but his resolve unbroken. That python, thick as a man's torso and longer than my pickup truck, had wrapped itself around my gentle camel with the kind of methodical cruelty that makes you question the natural order of things. I'm Jake Morrison. Been working this land since before most folks around here were born. Lost my beloved Sarah 5 years back to cancer and my boy Billy 3 years ago in a ranch accident that still haunts my dreams. These days it's just me, my ranch hand, Maria Santos, and the animals that have become more family than livestock. Dr. Sarah Beth Coleman, our veterinarian, was racing over from 3 counties away. But time wasn't on our side. Badr's story started 2 years back when I pulled him from an illegal fighting ring down in Mexico. That camel came to me broken, scarred, and mean as a rattlesnake. Most folks said I was crazy for taking him in, but something in his eyes reminded me of myself after Sarah passed. Lost, angry, but still fighting. Then came Layla, a pregnant camel from a bankrupt ranch, sweet as pie and gentle as morning rain. The moment Badr laid eyes on her, something shifted. That ornery camel turned into the most devoted partner you ever did see, following her around like a lovesick teenager, sharing his feed, standing guard while she rested. Sarah used to say, animals know love when they see it. Jake, sometimes better than people do. Now here they were, Badr's wounds weeping blood, but his dark eyes never leaving Layla's face. Every few minutes he'd lower his great head and make these soft rumbling sounds like he was talking to her, telling her to hold on. The python had been squeezing for hours, and I could see Layla's breathing getting shallower, more desperate. Maria arrived just as my radio crackled to life. Jake, this is Doc Coleman. I'm 30 minutes out, but from what you're describing, we might not have 30 minutes. That calf inside her, if we lose the mother, we lose them both. Badr seemed to understand every word. He lifted his massive head and looked straight at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and I swear on my Sarah's grave, that camel was trying to tell me something. His breathing was labored, his legs shaking from standing guard for so long, but there wasn't a quit in him. That camel's got more heart than most men I know, Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face. Love don't quit when things get tough. Just then, the python tightened its grip. Layla's eyes rolled back, showing white, and Badr let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet, a sound of pure anguish that I'll hear echoing in my nightmares forever. That roar from Badr cut through me like a blade, carrying me back 2 years to the day everything changed on this ranch. The sound reminded me so much of my boy Billy's voice calling out during that terrible accident, and suddenly I was drowning in memories I tried so hard to bury. It was a scorching August morning when the livestock trailer pulled up my drive, carrying the most broken-down camel I'd ever laid eyes on. Badr stepped off that trailer like a warrior returning from hell, scarred, suspicious, and mad at the world. His hide was crisscrossed with old wounds from fighting, his left ear torn from God knows what kind of abuse, and his eyes held the kind of darkness that comes from seeing too much pain. The Mexican authorities had raided an illegal fighting operation outside Tijuana, where they'd been forcing camels to fight exotic animals for the entertainment of rich folks with more money than sense. Badr had been their prize fighter, undefeated in 37 matches against everything from wild boars to mountain lions. But the cost of those victories was written all over his battered body. "Jake, you're out of your ever-loving mind," Billy said, watching Badr pace the quarantine pen like a caged lion. "That animal's too dangerous. One wrong move and he'll kill somebody." My son was a good man, but he never did understand that sometimes the most broken things just need someone to believe they can heal. I spent weeks just sitting by Badr's pen, talking to him like he was people. Told him about the ranch, about Sarah's passing, about how lonely these rolling hills could get when you had nobody left to share them with. That camel would stand at the far end of his enclosure, snorting and pawing the ground, but his ears would twitch forward whenever I spoke. Animals hear more than words. They hear the hurt underneath. The breakthrough came on a September evening when a thunderstorm rolled across the county. Badr was pacing frantically, and I realized those fighting rings had conditioned him to expect violence when he heard loud noises. I stayed with him all night, talking him through every crack of lightning, every rumble of thunder. By morning, that camel was eating oats right out of my hand. Then came Layla, and Lord help me. It was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. She arrived on a cold October morning, heavy with calf and shivering from neglect. The family that owned her had lost their farm to the bank, and they were selling off livestock to pay debts. Layla was gentle as a lamb with soft, brown eyes that seemed to apologize for existing. She was everything Badr wasn't: trusting, sweet-natured, full of hope despite her circumstances. I'll never forget the moment Badr first saw her. He was in the main pasture, and I was leading Layla to a smaller pen to settle in. Badr stopped mid-graze, lifted his massive head, and stared. Not the aggressive stare of a territorial camel, but something else entirely. Something that reminded me of the first time I laid eyes on my Sarah at a county fair dance 47 years ago. Badr approached the fence, slow and careful, making these soft, rumbling sounds. I'd never heard from him before. Layla walked right up to the fence line, unafraid, and they touched noses through the wire. In that moment, I watched two broken souls recognize each other. "Well, I'll be damned," I whispered to myself. "That camel's gone," and fell in love. Over the next few weeks, Badr transformed before my eyes. The angry, violent animal who terrorized fighting rings became a gentle giant who'd share his feed with Layla, stand guard while she rested, and follow her around the pasture like a devoted husband. When other camels got too close, Badr would position himself between them and Layla, not aggressively, but protectively. He'd learned the difference between fighting and defending. Meyer used to say that animals understand love better than most people because they don't complicate it with pride or fear. "Watch a good ranch dog with his family," she'd tell me. "That's what love looks like. Constant, faithful, without conditions or expectations." Badr proved her right every single day. When Layla went into false labor one December night, Badr stood beside her stall for 14 hours straight, refusing food and water until she was safe. When a pack of coyotes threatened the herd, Badr positioned Layla in the center and fought off 6 predators single-handedly, taking wounds that should have killed him, but never backing down. Billy still didn't understand. "Dad, they're just animals. You're reading human emotions into basic instinct." But I knew better. I'd seen the way Badr would rest his great head against Layla's flank when she was tired, how he'd guide her to the sweetest grass, how his eyes never left her when she grazed. That wasn't instinct. That was devotion. The night Billy died, Badr seemed to know something was wrong before I even got the phone call. He kept walking to the fence line, looking toward the highway, making low sounds of distress. When I finally came home from the hospital, empty-handed and broken-hearted, Badr met me at the gate. That big camel looked at me with those intelligent eyes and somehow understood that our family had gotten smaller. From that night on, Badr would come to the fence whenever I sat on the porch, grieving. He wouldn't make a sound, just stand there like a 2000 bee guardian angel, reminding me that some kinds of love survive even death. Layla would join him, and the three of us would share our loneliness under the Texas stars. Some hearts are just meant to beat together. I tell folks who asked about my unusual pair, you can't explain love, you just know it when you see it. Badr's mysterious nighttime behavior started around that time. He'd make rounds of the entire ranch after dark, checking fence lines, listening for trouble, keeping watch over everything and everyone he considered family. I'd see his silhouette moving through the moonlight like a ghost, always returning to Layla's side before dawn. Now, standing in the morning mist, watching Badr fight for Layla's life, I understood what my Sarah had been trying to tell me all those years. Love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every single day. Badr chose Layla that first October morning, and he'd been choosing her every day since. The radio crackled again, jerking me back to the present crisis. Jake, Layla's pulse is dropping fast. We're running out of time. Badr lifted his blooded head and looked straight at me. And in that moment, I saw myself reflected in his desperate eyes, a man who'd failed to save the ones he loved most, facing that same terrible helplessness all over again. The dust cloud from Dr. Sarah Beth Coleman's emergency veterinary truck was still settling when she jumped out, medical kit in hand and determination written across her weathered face. Behind her, Maria was already coordinating with the animal control officers who'd arrived from 3 counties over, their faces grim as they took in the scene before them. Sweet Jesus, Dr. Coleman breathed, approaching the fence line where Badr maintained his vigil. In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this. Badr's response to the approaching humans was nothing short of extraordinary. Instead of the aggressive posturing you'd expect from a protective camel, he began what I can only describe as calculated positioning. He moved with deliberate precision, stepping aside just enough to allow Dr. Coleman visual access to Layla's head and neck, while keeping his massive body between the python and any potential rescuers. That camel's thinking 3 moves ahead, Maria whispered in amazement. Look at how he's angling himself. He's giving us a clear shot at the snake's head without exposing Layla to crossfire. Dr. Coleman was already assembling her tranquilizer rifle, loading it with enough sedative to drop a horse. But as she raised the weapon to her shoulder, Badr did something that made us all freeze in place. He stepped directly into her line of fire, shaking his great head in what looked for all the world like a deliberate no. He won't let us take the shot, Dr. Coleman said, lowering her rifle. It's like he knows the risk. And that's when the controversial decision hit me like a lightning bolt. What if we use Badr as bait? I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth even as I spoke them. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and Dr. Coleman's jaw dropped open. Jake Morrison, have you taken leave of your senses? Dr. Coleman snapped. We can't risk Badr's life too. That python could kill him just as easily as it's killing Layla. Look at him, Doc, I said, pointing to Badr's deliberate movements. He's already made his choice. We're not asking him to do anything he ain't already doing. Badr seemed to be listening to every word of our argument. As we debated his fate, he began a series of specific movements that I'd seen before but never understood. He would approach the python from different angles. Retreat. Circle back. Always keeping Layla protected, but clearly studying his enemy. Maria, tears streaming down her face, spoke up with a conviction that surprised us all. Their family, Badr and Layla. They chose each other. And you don't abandon family when the chips are down. If Badr's willing to risk everything for her, then we owe it to him to let him try. That's when Badr began what I can only call communication. He started making a series of specific sounds, not the angry bellowing of an aggressive camel, but measured almost conversational noises, low rumbles, short huffs, even what sounded like questioning inflections. Each sound was accompanied by precise body language, and I realized with growing amazement that Badr was trying to tell us his plan. That camel's got more brains than most politicians, I muttered, watching Badr's deliberate demonstration. He's been studying that snake, learning its patterns. Dr. Coleman was watching Badr with the intensity of a scientist observing a breakthrough. Jake, I think you're right. Look at how he's moving. He's not acting on instinct anymore. He's strategizing. The shocking revelation hit me like a freight train as I watched Badr position himself for what looked like an attack. Those scars covering his body weren't just from random violence. They were from specific calculated encounters. Badr had been trained to fight exotic animals in those Mexican fighting rings, and that experience was now his greatest weapon. But instead of the brutal assault I expected, Badr began doing something that defied everything I thought I knew about animal behavior. He approached the python with measured steps, making those same conversational sounds, his head lowered in what almost looked like a submissive posture. "He's not going to attack," Coleman whispered in amazement. "He's trying to negotiate." Badr's intelligence became crystal clear as we watched him work. Every movement was calculated, every sound deliberate. He would advance toward the python's head, make his rumbling vocalizations, then retreat slightly when the snake showed signs of tightening its grip on Layla. It was like watching a master negotiator at work. "Sometimes you got to trust what you can't understand," I said, remembering Sarah's words from years ago. "That camel knows something we don't." The ticking clock was becoming unbearable. Layla's breathing had grown so shallow that we could barely see her chest rise and fall. Her unborn calf was moving less frequently, and Dr. Coleman's instruments were showing dangerously low vital signs for both mother and baby. Badr seemed to sense the urgency too. His conversations with the python became more insistent, his movements more purposeful. He was running out of time and options, and we all knew it. That's when Maria noticed something that changed everything. "Look at the python's head," she said, pointing. "There's something around its neck." Dr. Coleman pulled out her binoculars and focused on the snake's upper body. "Dear God," she breathed, "it's wearing a collar. This isn't a wild python. It's somebody's pet." The implications hit us all at once. This snake wasn't acting on predatory instinct. It was lost, confused, probably starving. Badr's non-aggressive approach suddenly made perfect sense. He wasn't trying to fight an enemy. He was trying to communicate with another confused, displaced animal. The collar was weathered and partially hidden by the python's coils, but we could make out what looked like an address tag. This snake had a home, or at least used to. Someone somewhere had abandoned this creature to fend for itself in a landscape where it didn't belong. Badr's fighting ring experience wasn't about violence. It was about survival, about learning to read other animals, about understanding that sometimes the strongest response isn't the most aggressive one. He'd been forced to fight pythons before, but he'd also learned how they thought, how they moved, what they feared. "Every creature's got a story," I said, watching Badr continue his patient negotiations. "And most of them ain't pretty." The controversy of our situation was becoming clear. We weren't dealing with a natural predator threatening livestock. We were looking at two victims of human negligence. The python was as much a victim as Layla, abandoned by irresponsible owners who'd probably gotten in over their heads with an exotic pet. Badr understood this in a way that we humans were only beginning to grasp. His approach wasn't about dominance or territory. It was about finding a solution that did not require more violence, more death, more victims of human foolishness. But understanding the situation didn't make it less desperate. Layla's time was running out, and despite Badr's remarkable intelligence and patience, the python showed no signs of releasing its grip. The snake was probably weak from starvation, operating on survival instinct, even as Badr tried to reason with it. Dr. Coleman was preparing backup plans, surgical options that might save Layla, even if we couldn't free her from the python's coils. But any invasive procedure, while she was still trapped, was incredibly risky. Badr seemed to sense our growing desperation. His negotiations with the python became more urgent, his body language more pleading. That proud, powerful camel was essentially begging for his mate's life, and the heartbreak of it was almost too much to bear. "You can't outrun your past," Maria said softly, watching Badr use his painful history to try to save his future. "But you can choose what to do with it." The python suddenly tightened its grip again, and Layla's eyes rolled back, showing white. Badr's anguished bellow shook the ground, and for a moment we thought we'd lost her. But then something happened that none of us could have predicted. The python's grip loosened slightly, almost as if it had heard something in Badr's cry that reached through its confusion and fear. Badr had found a frequency of communication that the python understood, but whether it would be enough to save Layla remained terrifyingly unclear. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about animal intelligence and communication. Badr wasn't preparing to attack the python. He was having a conversation with it. The sounds coming from that magnificent camel weren't the aggressive bellows of a territorial male, but a series of measured, almost musical vocalizations that seemed to carry meaning beyond anything I'd witnessed in 40 years of ranching. The python's response was equally astonishing. Instead of the defensive hissing you'd expect from a cornered predator, the massive snake began to loosen its grip on Layla just slightly, as if responding to Badr's vocal cues. Its head turned toward Badr with what could only be described as recognition. "That's impossible," Dr. Coleman whispered, her veterinary training wearing with the evidence before her eyes. "Snakes don't communicate like that. They don't respond to mammalian vocalizations." But Maria was already moving, her sharp eyes catching something the rest of us had missed. She climbed over the fence with the fearless determination of a woman who'd grown up around livestock. Approaching the python's tail end, where a weathered leather collar was barely visible beneath the coils. "Jake, look at this," she called out, carefully working to expose more of the collar without startling the snake. "There's an address tag, and it's from one of those fancy estates up in Highland Park, where the oil money folks live." The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. Highland Park was 3 hours north of here, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Texas, where people collected exotic pets like trophies and thought money could solve any problem their whims created. Badr seemed to understand that we'd made a breakthrough. His vocalizations became more insistent, more rhythmic, and I realized with growing amazement that he was using sounds he'd learned in those fighting rings, not battle cries, but the specific calls handlers use to control animals during matches. "Sweet Mother of God," I breathed as the pieces fell into place. Badr's not just talking to that snake, he's giving it commands. Commands it was trained to respond to. Dr. Coleman was frantically working her satellite phone, trying to track down information about the address on the collar. Meanwhile, the python continued to respond to Badr's directions, loosening its grip incrementally with each vocal cue. The backstory that emerged over the next few minutes was both heartbreaking and infuriating. The Highland Park address belonged to the Blackwood family, oil executives who'd made headlines 2 years ago for their messy, expensive divorce. According to Dr. Coleman's contacts, they'd abandoned their estate during the proceedings, leaving behind not just property, but a private zoo's worth of exotic animals. The neighbors have been complaining for months about escaped animals. Dr. Coleman reported, her voice tight with anger. Apparently, the Blackwoods just walked away from everything. Pythons, big cats, even a couple of bears. The city's been trying to round them up, but they keep missing some. Badr's intelligence became even more remarkable as this revelation sank in. He wasn't just communicating with the python. He was drawing on his traumatic past to help another animal that had been abandoned by the very humans who should have protected it. The python, we realized, wasn't acting as a predator. It was acting as a creature that had been trained to constrict on command, probably as part of some twisted entertainment for wealthy guests. Now starving and confused, it was following the only behavioral patterns it knew. Badr's scarred hide told the story of countless forced encounters with animals just like this python, creatures that had been turned into weapons for human amusement. But instead of letting that trauma make him bitter, Badr was using his hard-won knowledge to save not just Layla, but the python itself. "That camel's showing more compassion than the people who created this mess," Maria said, tears streaming down her face as she watched Badr patiently work with the snake. The controversy of our situation was becoming clear to everyone involved. The arriving news crews, the gathering crowd of neighbors, the animal control officers, everyone had an opinion about what should be done. Half the crowd was screaming for the python to be destroyed immediately, while others argued for finding a way to save both animals. Badr, meanwhile, continued his remarkable demonstration of interspecies communication. He would approach the python's head, make specific sounds, then retreat when the snake responded correctly by loosening its grip. It was like watching a master trainer work with a student, except the roles were reversed. The intended victim was teaching the predator how to let go. The time pressure was becoming unbearable. Layla's breathing had become so shallow that we could barely detect it, and her unborn calf had stopped moving entirely. Dr. Coleman was preparing emergency surgical equipment, knowing that we might have only minutes to save both mother and baby. But Badr seemed to sense something the rest of us couldn't. His communications with the python became more urgent, more complex. He began incorporating physical movements, specific steps, head gestures, even what looked like ritualistic positioning that must have been part of the fighting ring protocols. That's when the python did something that made everyone fall silent. It began to uncoil itself from Layla. Not completely, but systematically, starting from her hindquarters and working toward her head. The snake was following a specific pattern, as if responding to a sequence of commands it remembered from its training. "He's doing it," Dr. Coleman whispered in amazement. "Badr's actually convincing it to let her go." But just as hope began to surge through all of us, something went terribly wrong. The python suddenly tightened its grip again, more violently than before, and Layla's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Her body went completely limp, and the monitoring equipment Dr. Coleman had managed to attach began showing flatline readings. Badr's response was heartbreaking. The proud, powerful camel collapsed to his knees beside Layla, making sounds of grief so primal and anguished that several people in the crowd began openly weeping. He pressed his great head against Layla's neck, his whole body shuddering with what could only be described as sobs. The python, perhaps sensing the change in Badr's demeanor, began to loosen its grip once again. But it was too late. Layla wasn't breathing, and her calf hadn't moved in over an hour. That's when Badr did something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. He looked up at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and I saw in them a reflection of my own grief. When I lost Billy, when I lost Sarah, he was asking me, as clearly as if he'd spoken the words, to help him save the only family he had left. Dr. Coleman was already moving with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd pulled animals back from the brink of death countless times before. She began CPR on Layla while Badr maintained his vigil, never moving from her side, never stopping his soft vocalizations that seemed to be calling her back from wherever she'd gone. The python, meanwhile, had completely released its hold and was slithering away toward the fence line. But instead of fleeing, it coiled itself into a defensive position and waited, as if it understood that its fate was now tied to the outcome of this desperate rescue attempt. Badr's faith in Dr. Coleman was absolute. Even as she worked frantically to restart Layla's heart, injecting stimulants and performing chest compressions, Badr never interfered. He seemed to understand that this human was fighting the same battle he'd been fighting, the battle to keep love alive in the face of impossible odds. The minutes stretched like hours. Dr. Coleman worked with sweat pouring down her face, her hands never stopping their rhythmic compressions on Layla's chest. Maria held IV bags and handed over equipment with the efficiency of a trained surgical nurse. The crowd had grown silent, everyone holding their breath as life and death hung in the balance. Badr never wavered, even when Layla showed no signs of response, even when the monitors continued to show flatline readings. That devoted camel kept making his soft calling sounds, kept pressing his nose to her face, kept believing that love could be stronger than death. And then, just when it seemed like we'd lost her forever, Layla's chest rose with a shallow, gasping breath. The monitors began showing a weak but steady heartbeat, and Badr's triumphant bellow shook the very heavens. But our celebration was premature. The python, which we'd all but forgotten in the drama of Layla's rescue, suddenly reared up near the fence line, and we realized with horror that it wasn't alone. Layla's heartbeat had barely stabilized when the monitor started screaming again. Her pulse was dropping dangerously low, and Dr. Coleman's face went white as she checked the readings. "She's going into cardiac arrest again," she shouted over the chaos. "We're losing her." Badr's anguished bellows filled the air as Layla's body went limp once more for 30 terrifying seconds. Her heart stopped completely, and I felt my own heart breaking as I watched that magnificent camel press his blooded forehead against his mate's neck, making sounds of grief that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. The memory hit me like a physical blow, standing in a hospital corridor 3 years ago, watching the monitors flatline as my boy Billy slipped away from us. I'd been helpless then, unable to do anything but hold Sarah's hand and watch our world crumble. Now, seeing Badr's desperation, I was reliving that nightmare all over again. "Don't you dare give up on her," I whispered. not sure if I was talking to Badr, Dr. Coleman, or God himself. That camel's been fighting for her all morning. Don't let it be for nothing. Dr. Coleman worked like a woman possessed, injecting adrenaline directly into Layla's heart while performing chest compressions with a force that would have broken human ribs. Badr seemed to understand that this human was his ally in the fight for Layla's life, and he positioned himself to give her better access while never stopping his own efforts to call Layla back. That's when my mind drifted back to a summer evening 2 years ago when I'd found Badr and Layla together for the first time. I'd been checking the herd before dark, and there they were in the far pasture, Badr on guard while Layla rested in the grass, her head on his massive foreleg. The sight had taken my breath away because it reminded me so much of Sarah and me in our early days, when love was new and everything seemed possible. Badr had been different that night, gentler somehow, like Layla's presence had awakened something in him that the fighting rings had tried to destroy. They'd found each other in the darkness of their separate traumas, and watching them together had given me hope that maybe broken things could still heal if they had the right kind of love. The harsh beeping of the monitors jerked me back to the present crisis. Layla's heart was beating again, weak but steady, and Dr. Coleman was preparing emergency equipment for what looked like an immediate cocaine section. "The calf's in distress," she announced grimly. "If we don't deliver now, we'll lose them both." But we had another problem. The python hadn't left. It had retreated to a spot near the fence where a clutch of eggs lay partially buried in the soft earth. The snake was protecting its own offspring, just as Badr was fighting for his family. The moral complexity of our situation was becoming overwhelming. The news crews had arrived in full force, their cameras capturing every moment of the drama unfolding in our pasture. The story was already going viral on social media. Footage of Badr's devotion, his remarkable communication with the python, and now Layla's desperate fight for life. Comments were pouring in from around the world, some calling Badr a hero, others demanding the python's immediate destruction. The community was splitting down the middle. Local ranchers who understood the practical realities of livestock management were arguing for decisive action to eliminate the threat. But animal rights activists were arriving by the hour, setting up protest signs and demanding that both animals be saved. The situation was spiraling beyond anything we could control. Badr seemed oblivious to the human drama surrounding him. His entire world had narrowed to the circle of grass where Layla lay fighting for her life. He hadn't eaten or drunk water in over 6 hours. His own wounds were still bleeding, but his focus never wavered from his mate and their unborn calf. Maria was coordinating with the arriving veterinary team, a group of specialists Dr. Coleman had called in from the state university. They brought portable surgical equipment and expertise in high-risk deliveries, but they also brought more controversy. Half the team wanted to prioritize Layla's life, while others argued for trying to save the calf, even if it meant risking the mother. The debate was academic to Badr. He'd already made his choice clear through his actions. Layla came first, always and completely. When the surgical team tried to position their equipment, Badr allowed them access but remained close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. His trust was conditional and constantly evaluated. Dr. Coleman began the delicate process of preparing Layla for emergency surgery, but the anesthesia presented a life-threatening risk to an animal already in cardiac distress. Badr seemed to sense the danger, becoming increasingly agitated as the medical team worked around his mate. That's when something remarkable happened. Dr. Coleman, perhaps remembering her own losses, began talking to Badr as she worked. "I know you're scared, big guy," she said softly while prepping Layla's surgical site. "I lost a baby once, too, ago, but I'm going to fight for your calf the same way you've been fighting for Layla." Badr's response was immediate and profound. He calmed visibly, his breathing slowed, and he positioned himself so that Layla could feel his presence without interfering with the medical procedure. It was as if Dr. Coleman's words had created a bond of understanding between human and animal grief. The surgery began under the most primitive conditions imaginable in an open pasture with a crowd of spectators, protesters, and news crews documenting every moment. Dr. Coleman worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd been given a second chance to save what couldn't be saved before. Badr maintained his vigil throughout the procedure, making soft sounds that seemed to reassure both Layla and the humans working to save her. When the calf's heartbeat appeared on the monitors, weak but present. Badr's relief was visible in every line of his massive body. But the python situation was becoming more complicated by the hour. Animal control officers were arguing with wildlife specialists about the best way to relocate a mother snake protecting eggs. The snake couldn't be moved safely without destroying her nest, and destroying the nest seemed cruel after everything we'd learned about abandonment and responsibility. The controversy reached a boiling point when a group of protesters tried to form a human chain around the python's nesting area, while local ranchers demanded immediate action to remove what they saw as a continuing threat to livestock. Badr, exhausted and stressed, began showing signs of the aggressive behavior he displayed when he first arrived at the ranch. The situation deteriorated rapidly when someone in the crowd threw a rock at the python, causing it to rear up defensively. Badr immediately moved to place himself between the snake and the crowd, not to protect the python necessarily, but to maintain control over a situation that could threaten Layla's recovery. Coleman was fighting to save both mother and calf. When Layla's blood pressure crashed again, the combination of trauma, surgery, and stress was pushing her body beyond its limits. Badr seemed to sense the crisis, pressing closer to his mate and making sounds of such desperate encouragement that even the protesters fell silent. The calf's heartbeat was growing stronger, but Layla was weakening with every passing minute. We were faced with the nightmare scenario every rancher dreads, choosing between saving the mother or the baby, knowing that Badr would never forgive us if we made the wrong choice. Badr made the choice for us. As Dr. Coleman struggled to control Layla's bleeding, Badr did something that defied every instinct of a protective male. He stepped back, giving the medical team complete access to his mate, and began making sounds that seemed to be giving Layla permission to let go if she needed to. A man's true character shows when nobody's watching, I whispered, remembering something Sarah used to say. But Badr's character was on display for the whole world to see, and it was more noble than anything I'd ever witnessed. The monitor showed Layla's vital signs stabilizing as Dr. Coleman completed the cesarean section. When the calf emerged, a perfect little camel with her mother's gentle eyes and her father's determined spirit. Badr's triumphant bellow could be heard for miles, but our celebration was cut short by a commotion near the fence line. The python, stressed by the crowd and noise, had begun to move aggressively toward its eggs, and several people were in danger of being caught in its defensive strike range. Badr, despite his exhaustion and relief at his daughter's birth, immediately moved toward the new threat. The battle for his family's safety wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sometimes doing right hurts more than doing wrong, Maria said, watching Badr prepare to face yet another challenge in his epic day of protecting everything he loved. The moment of joy at the calf's birth was shattered when Badr collapsed, not from exhaustion or relief, but from something far more terrifying. The massive camel's legs simply gave out beneath him, and he crashed to the ground with a sound that made everyone freeze in horror. "Badr!" I shouted, rushing toward the fence as Dr. Coleman spun away from the newborn calf to assess this new crisis. The camel, who'd been fighting all day for his family's survival, was lying on his side, his breathing labored, his eyes showing the kind of distress that makes a rancher's blood run cold. The psychological horror of the situation hit me like a freight train. We were going to lose Badr just as Layla and the calf were finally safe. After everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd endured, that magnificent animal was going to dot within sight of the family he'd fought so hard to protect. Badr's breakdown triggered something primal in the crowd that had gathered around our ranch. Half the protesters who'd been demanding the python's protection suddenly turned on the snake, screaming for its immediate destruction. The other half formed a tighter circle around the python's nesting area, determined to prevent any violence. The situation was spiraling into chaos, with my dying camel caught in the middle of a human conflict that had nothing to do with the animals involved. "Get back, doctor," Coleman shouted at the crowd, her voice cutting through the noise. "All of you, get back. This animal is in shock, and your shouting is making it worse." But the community split was too deep to be controlled by reason. Ranchers who'd been watching Badr's heroic fight in all day were now furious that he might die because we'd wasted time trying to save the python. Animal rights activists were equally convinced that Badr's collapse proved we should have handled the situation more compassionately from the beginning. The media frenzy escalated the tension beyond anything we could manage. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing every moment of Badr's distress. Social media was exploding with conflicting narratives. Badr as hero, Badr as victim, the python as villain, the python as fellow victim of human negligence. In the middle of this human case, Badr was fighting for his life with the same stubborn determination he had shown all day. But this wasn't a fight he could win through strength or intelligence. His massive heart, down, which had been beating for nearly 2,000 days of muscle and bone, while under extreme stress for over 8 hours, was simply giving out. I knelt beside Badr's head, pressing my weathered hand against his scarred neck, feeling his pulse growing weaker with each passing moment. "Don't you dare quit on me now, big guy," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Your girls need you, Layla and that little calf. They need their protector." Badr's eyes found mine, and in them I saw the same look I'd seen in Billy's eyes during those final moments in the hospital, a mixture of love, regret, and the terrible understanding that some battles can't be won no matter how hard you fight. The confession came pouring out of me then, all the guilt and failure I'd been carrying for 3 years. I failed my son. Badr, I wasn't there when Billy needed me most, just like I can't save you now. But you never failed anybody. You protected your family better than I ever protected mine. Badr's response to my words was heartbreaking. With tremendous effort, he lifted his massive head and looked toward where Layla lay with their newborn daughter. Then he looked back at me. And I swear on my beloved Sarah's grave, that camel was trying to tell me something important about responsibility and love. Dr. Coleman was working frantically, checking Badr's vital signs, administering stimulants, doing everything in her power to stabilize him. But we all knew we were fighting a losing battle. Badr's body had simply been pushed beyond its limits, and no amount of medical intervention could repair the damage done by hours of extreme stress and physical trauma. The impossible choice was staring us all in the face. Badr needed immediate veterinary intervention that could only be provided at a major animal hospital hours away. But moving him in his current condition would almost certainly kill him. We could try to stabilize him here with limited resources, or we could risk everything on a desperate attempt to get him professional help. Badr made the choice for us in the most heartbreaking way possible. As Dr. Coleman prepared to administer another round of cardiac stimulants, Badr did something that will haunt me forever. He struggled to his feet, swaying dangerously, and walked the few yards to where Layla lay with their calf. Using what had to be the last of his strength, Badr positioned himself protectively over his family one more time. He nuzzled the newborn calf gently, then pressed his forehead against Layla's neck in a gesture of love, so pure and desperate that it broke something inside everyone watching. The crowd fell silent as they realized what they were witnessing. This wasn't just an animal protecting its territory or following instinct. This was a father saying goodbye to his family. A husband making sure his wife and child would be safe before he let go. Layla's medical crisis interrupted Badr's farewell. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously as she tried to respond to Badr's distress, and Dr. Coleman found herself fighting to save both animals simultaneously. The stress of watching Badr collapse was threatening to undo all the progress they'd made in saving her life. "We're going to lose them both," Dr. Coleman said grimly, her hands working to stabilize Layla while keeping one eye on Badr's failing condition. "Layla's going into shock watching Badr die, and Badr won't let go as long as he thinks she needs him." That's when Maria Santos did something that changed everything. This young woman who'd grown up watching her own father sacrifice everything for his family walked directly up to Badr, placed her hands on his massive head, and began speaking to him in Spanish. The soft musical words her father had used when she was frightened as a child. Badr's response was immediate and profound. His breathing slowed. His wild eyes focused on Maria's face, and somehow her words seemed to reach through his pain and panic to touch something deeper. She was telling him in the language of love and loss and letting go that it was okay to rest, that his family would be protected. The community healing began in that moment as people on both sides of the controversy recognized the universal language of grief and love. Protesters and ranchers alike began moving closer, not to argue or make demands, but to bear witness to something sacred happening in our pasture. Badr's dignity in those final moments taught us all what it really means to love someone. Even as his strength failed, even as death approached, his focus remained entirely on his family's welfare. He kept lifting his head to check on Layla and the calf, kept positioning his body to shield them, kept fighting to stay alive, not for himself, but for them. The breakdown I'd been holding back for 3 years finally came as I watched Badr's heroic struggle, all the tears I hadn't cried for Billy, all the grief I'd buried when Sarah died, all the guilt and regret in lonely nights. It all came pouring out as I knelt beside this dying camel who'd shown me what real courage looked like. There comes a time when a man's got to choose between being safe and being right. I sobbed, remembering something my own father had told me years ago. Badr had made that choice over and over again throughout this terrible day, always choosing what was right over what was easy. Dr. Coleman was preparing what looked like a final round of emergency treatment when something miraculous happened. Badr's vital signs suddenly stabilized, not improving dramatically but ceasing their deadly decline. His breathing became more regular. His pulse strengthened just enough to give us hope. "Faith ain't faith till it's all you got left," I whispered, watching Badr summon reserves of strength that shouldn't have existed. But this wasn't just stubborn determination anymore. This was love giving Badr the power to transcend his physical limitations. The python situation resolved itself in the strangest way possible. As if sensing that the real drama was playing out elsewhere, the snake began moving its eggs toward the fence line farthest from the crowd. Animal control officers were able to safely relocate the entire family without violence or further controversy. Badr seemed to understand that the immediate threats to his family were over. His collapse hadn't been just physical exhaustion. It had been the emotional crash that comes when someone who's been running on pure adrenaline and determination finally allows themselves to feel the full weight of what they've endured. As the sun began to set over Lazy Creek Ranch, casting long shadows across the pasture where this epic drama had unfolded, Badr lay beside his family with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. But we all knew that the real test was just beginning, whether this magnificent animal would survive the aftermath of his heroic day. The bond between Badr and his family had been tested by crisis and proven unbreakable. But the cost of that loyalty was written in every labored breath, every tremor in his massive frame, every moment of weakness that reminded us how close we'd come to losing everything. What happened next defied every expectation we had about Badr's condition and revealed a truth so shocking that it changed everything we thought we understood about this remarkable camel as the Dr. Coleman worked frantically to stabilize his vital signs. Badr did something that made us all stop and stare in amazement. He wasn't dying, he was giving. The revelation hit Dr. Coleman first as she monitored the portable IV equipment she'd rigged between Badr and Layla. "My God," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "He's not collapsing from exhaustion. He's conducting a blood transfusion. Badr is literally giving his life force to save Layla." The sophisticated understanding this required was staggering. Somehow Badr had learned to recognize the signs of blood loss and shock from watching veterinary procedures over the years. He'd positioned himself precisely to allow the IV line Dr. Coleman had established to flow from his robust circulatory system into Layla's weakened body. The shocking truth about Badr's medical knowledge became clear as we watched him adjust his position to optimize the transfusion flow. This wasn't instinct or coincidence. This was learned behavior from a camel who'd been present during Billy's final moments in the ranch 3 years ago. I'd never told anyone the full story of Billy's accident. Couldn't bear to relive those horrible hours when my son lay bleeding in the pasture after being thrown from his horse. But Badr had been there, watching from the fence line as the paramedics worked desperately to replace the blood Billy was losing. That camel had witnessed every procedure, absorbed every technique, and somehow retained the knowledge for this moment. Badr saw Billy die. I confessed to Dr. Coleman, my voice breaking with the weight of 3 years of suppressed grief. He watched the paramedics try blood transfusions, watched them fail to save my boy. Now he's trying to prevent another loss, the only way he knows how. The emotional devastation of this revelation was overwhelming. Badr hadn't just been fighting to save Layla. He'd been fighting to prevent me from experiencing the same loss that had nearly destroyed me when Billy died. This magnificent animal had been carrying the trauma of witnessing my son's death, and now he was using that painful knowledge to heal instead of harm. Badr's sacrifice was weakening him dangerously, but his determination never wavered. Every few minutes, he would lift his massive head to check on Layla's breathing, on the calf's movements, ensuring that his gift of blood was having the desired effect. His own pulse grew weaker as Layla's grew stronger. A living demonstration of what it means to love someone more than your own life. Layla's recovery began almost immediately as Badr's blood restored her strength. Her breathing deepened, her color improved, and she began responding to her newborn calf's attempts to nurse. The transfusion was working, but at a cost that might prove too high to bear. The python situation had resolved itself quietly during Badr's medical drama. Animal control officers had successfully relocated the snake and her eggs to a wildlife sanctuary where she would receive proper care and eventually be released in an appropriate habitat. The crisis that had started our day was over, but Badr's heroic efforts had created a new emergency. The community response to Badr's sacrifice was immediate and profound. Protesters and ranchers who'd been at each other's throats hours earlier now stood together in respectful silence, recognizing that they were witnessing something sacred. The arguing stopped, the shouting ceased, and people began actually talking to each other about what they'd learned from watching Badr's devotion. Maria had been documenting everything, and her footage of Badr's blood transfusion went viral within hours. The images of this massive camel weakening in himself to save his mate touched something deep in people around the world. Comments poured in from every continent, sharing stories of animal devotion, of sacrifice, of love that transcends species. Jake's breakdown came when he realized the full scope of what Badr had endured. Not only had this camel survived the trauma of fighting rings, not only had he overcome his own violent conditioning to become a protector, but he'd also carried the burden of witnessing Billy's death and used that knowledge to prevent another tragedy. "I failed, my son," I sobbed, finally speaking the words that had been eating at my soul for 3 years. "I wasn't there when Billy needed me most, but Badr never forgot. He's been trying to save Billy ever since. And now he's saving Layla the same way he couldn't save my boy." Sarah's admission came as she monitored Badr's weakening pulse. "I see my lost child in every animal I save," she confessed quietly. "I became a veterinarian because I couldn't save my own baby. And now Badr's showing me what real healing looks like. He's not just saving Layla, he's healing all of us." The bitter victory was becoming clear as Badr's condition continued to deteriorate. Layla and her calf would survive, but Badr's heroic efforts might cost him everything. His fighting days were over, his strength permanently diminished, his massive heart damaged from the strain of supporting 2 lives instead of 1. Badr's legacy was being written in real time as people around the world shared his story. Children drew pictures of the heroic camel, families discussed the meaning of sacrifice and devotion, and animal welfare organizations used Badr's example to advocate for better treatment of all creatures. The cost of Badr's devotion became more apparent as evening approached. He was alive, but forever changed. The powerful camel who dominated the pasture would now need constant care and monitoring. His days of protecting the herd through physical intimidation were over, replaced by a different kind of leadership, one based on wisdom, experience, and the moral authority that comes from proven sacrifice. Maria's tears flowed freely as she realized Badr reminded her of her late father, who'd worked himself to exhaustion, providing for his family. "My papa died young 'cause he gave everything he had to take care of us," she whispered. "Badr's doing the same thing, loving his family so hard it's killing him." Dr. Coleman fought her own emotions as she continued monitoring both animals. Badr's sacrifice had forced her to confront her own losses, her own reasons for dedicating her life to saving animals she couldn't always save. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else be strong for you," she said, watching Badr continue his vigil despite his weakness. The setup for our resolution was becoming clear as the community united around Badr's example. The controversy that had divided neighbors and strangers was replaced by a shared understanding of what really mattered. Badr hadn't just saved his family, he'd saved a community from its own bitter divisions. Badr's trust in the humans around him had been absolute throughout his ordeal. Even as he weakened, even as his own survival became uncertain, he'd allowed us to help in ways that revealed the depth of connection possible between species. His faith in our good intentions had transformed everyone who witnessed it. As darkness fell over Lazy Creek Ranch, Badr lay beside his family with the quiet dignity of someone who'd given everything and found peace in the giving. But questions remained about his future, about whether love could truly be stronger than the physical limitations that now constrained his powerful body. Love ain't always pretty, but it's always worth it, I said softly, watching Badr's chest rise and fall in the rhythm of a heart that had proven its capacity for sacrifice beyond anything I'd ever imagined possible. 1 year later, on a golden summer morning that seemed blessed by heaven itself, I stood at the pasture fence, watching a scene that still brings tears to these old eyes. Badr moved slowly across the grass, his once powerful stride now measured and careful, but his dignity intact as he supervised his growing family. Little Hope, that's what we named Layla's calf, was now a spirited yearling with her mother's gentle nature and her father's protective instincts. She stayed close to Badr, not because she feared danger, but because she understood that this great camel was the reason she drew breath. Layla grazed peacefully nearby, her health fully restored, her devotion to Badr deeper than ever. The transformation in Badr was remarkable to witness. Though his days of physical dominance were behind him, he'd found a new purpose as the ranch's gentle giant. Children from 3 counties over came to meet the camel who'd become a living legend, and Badr seemed to understand his role as teacher and inspiration. Maria Santos Coleman. She'd married Dr. Sarah Beth 6 months ago in a ceremony where Badr served as ring bearer, carrying the wedding bands in a silk pouch tied to his massive neck. Now managed the educational programs at what had become the Badr Ridge Animal Sanctuary. Every week, school groups visited to learn about animal intelligence, devotion, and the bonds that connect all living creatures. The community that had been divided by controversy was now united by purpose. The ranch had become a healing place for both animals and humans, where folks came to remember what really mattered in life. Badr's story had inspired new laws protecting abandoned exotic animals and stricter regulations for people who wanted to own creatures they couldn't properly care for. Badr's bloodline continued through Hope and 3 other calves born that spring, each inheriting his protective instincts and remarkable intelligence. The sanctuary was expanding to accommodate other animals who needed second chances, guided by the principles Badr had taught us about redemption and unconditional love. As evening approached and Badr made his way to the oak tree, where he and Layla shared their daily sunset ritual, I thought about the journey that had brought us all here. That old camel had taught us that love ain't just for people, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest strength is found in gentleness. Some stories are too good to be true, I told my grandson as we watched Badr's family settle in for the night. But this one's got more truth than most folks can handle. And that's how a camel named Badr showed us all what it really means to love somebody. Not just with your heart, but with your whole life. Folks, if Badr's story doesn't remind you of what real love looks like, I don't know what will. That magnificent camel showed us something we've forgotten in this hurried world. That true devotion means showing up every single day, especially when it's hard. Just like the marriages that lasted through the Depression. Just like the parents who worked 2 jobs to put their kids through college. Just like the friendships that survived decades of life's ups and downs. Badr didn't love Layla because it was easy or convenient. He loved her because that's what love does. It protects, it sacrifices, it never gives up. How many of us can say we've loved someone with that kind of wholehearted commitment? In a time when everything seems disposable, when people quit at the first sign of trouble, Badr reminds us that some bonds are worth everything we have to give. His story isn't just about animals. It's about the kind of love that built this great nation. The kind that held families together through war and hardship. The kind that made ordinary people do extraordinary things. That's the love our grandchildren need to see. The love that makes life worth living. Share your thoughts. What moment in your own life taught you the true meaning of unconditional love? Have you ever witnessed devotion like Badr's in your own family or community? Drop a comment below. Your story might inspire someone else today.